Yeah, like over 50% of our population is women,
Mhm.
yet only 7% is financially included, right? 19% of all loans go to women only in Pakistan. And like we're big on lending. Like there's a lot of lending,
Yeah.
borrowing happening over there. But only 19% of those loans go to women. And agar aap SME sector mein bhi dekh lo, the SME sector mein it's only 3% of SME kind of loans go to women. And you know for a fact, being sort of like with having worked with and talked to a lot of these players, is because there's a lot of SME businesses that are women led, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
acceleration happening, and they can, but a lot of those programs are supporting them, but yet formal finance ke andar se they're still excluded.
Hi, everybody. Today I have a very special guest, Anusheh. And I think I know you since I2I times. We've had a chance to interview Kulsum Lakhani as well, the founder of I2I, which still is the only female-led VC in Pakistan. But you've had a chance to work with so many amazing organizations, Anusheh. Whether you call it like the last 4 to 5 years in the fintech world, now you are working with Oraan as well. We're going to get more into that. And I feel like Oraan is the only platform in my eyes that is working really like directly towards including women in the fintech space, like trying to make them more financially independent. And I think that's what really, strikes to me here. Abhi tak, why is there only one platform? Why isn't, why isn't it like a mainstream thing? But I'm really glad that whatever you've been doing so far has been very much affiliated with, youth-led initiatives, female empowerment. I think your entire journey has been just focused on that. So I think for me, it's an honor to have you on the show. Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I am a fan of everything you're doing.
ये शुरुआत हुई कहाँ से? Like ये startup का कीड़ा आया कहाँ से? Because कीड़ा I think तब से शुरू हुआ है जब startups होते भी नहीं थे पाकिस्तान में. So how did that start?
For sure. And it's really interesting. So, I mean, I won't say okay, it was something that was a calling, and I always knew that this is exactly where I'm ending up. I think I was in business school when that's when you're thinking about your career seriously शुरू तभी होता है कि अच्छा
Right.
हाँ आगे जिंदगी में क्या करना है. And I think like any other sort of business grad, my dream was very much the sort of cookie cutter. PNG used to come and do recruitment, and we used to be like so in awe of all of our seniors who would make it into the management trainee program and then get a full permanent offer, and the dream was okay, I'm going to go down that trajectory. Karachi move hona hai, management training करनी है, 3 साल job करूंगी इधर पाकिस्तान में, and then I'll get an international placement. So that
Yeah.
was the sort of career that I was kind of chasing. And what ended up happening was I'd cleared the test, recruitment ho rahi thi, and in the very first interview, that's very basic, and it's like get to know you kind of interview. Just like you clear very easily. I just I just flung that interview. I froze. I don't know what happened. It just did not work out for me. And I think all meaningful change, at least in life, or like a lot of meaningful change in your life often comes in times जब आप deep turmoil में होते हो और आपको कुछ
Right.
समझ नहीं आती. So something that I had been running towards and chasing my entire life, it collapsed all of a sudden, and then I was like, okay, I really need to think what else? What am I doing? And it was really interesting. Kuch us time pe, so I was involved with, like you said, like I've been very involved with mission driven things, and like
Yes.
it's really interesting because a lot of times it's also like I'm solving my own problems or problems that I've faced.
Right.
So like when I was younger, it was like, okay, what do I want to do? What kind of impact that I want to leave? And so I got involved with this student-led organization called Isaac.
Yes.
And actually that's where yeah, that's where that's where I first heard about startups. That's where I first became really interested in this space. I was at a conference, and one of the alumni, they'd started their own edtech startup, and I was just so I was so blown away with the kind of mission that they were sort of going towards. And also maybe obviously women's education I am a woman, so like, everything has always been around that, because I see
Yeah.
those problems a lot more, prominently. वो मेरी जिंदगी में भी barriers रहे, और like, sort of 10 times और किसी की जिंदगी में. So I got involved. Like I remember going to that conference, they'd come, and I remember just like, sort of shooting my shot and just saying an email, sending out an email and saying like, listen, I'd really like to work with you guys as a first job. And I remember like, उसको कहते हैं कहा था, अच्छा हाँ, how much do you want to be paid? And I was like, बस आप मेरा fuel कर दें. I just want to work here. Like I said, I got really scolded by that mentor much
Oh
later.
my
He's like,
God.
that's not
Yeah.
how you negotiate.
Yeah.
Um, but but that's how I really got in sort of into the startup space. And uske baad se, I think it's just been it just made a lot of sense. It made sense that all of my business training
Yep.
was coming to fruition, where I was applying a lot of that stuff, but without sort of that feeling of, I'd done a couple of corporate internships and just felt like this work is not exciting me.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, there's too many people doing the same kind of things, and it's not really sort of driving me to that extent. So that's how I arrived at it, and since then I think बहुत सी मेरी चीजें, like a lot of my life has been about just having the right mentors and sponsors who believed in me even before I believed in me, or I saw those things in myself. And so having that, sort of, so people have been a great multiplier. And I think Kulsum and I also first met through my first boss, right? So like my first startup that I worked for, sort of startup wrapped up in 5 months. And so I had nothing to do. And so he introduced me, my mentor and my boss kind of introduced me to Kulsum, and it just made a lot of sense at that time as well. I was part of the founding team. So like the first 3-4 people, in उस वक्त बाकी में कोई accelerators, हम accelerator थे, बनने भी उसकी उसमें आए, but like we quickly found out that the deal flow at that point in time was so the ecosystem was so nascent that you wouldn't get like a lot of sort of pipeline में आपको नहीं मिलते थे partners that would be ready for acceleration, right? So we were doing the job of incubator as well, and then a lot of other people started playing into the ecosystem as well. So that's how it started, and I've never looked back since.
Yeah, I think I really have to highlight here. This is one thing that I spoke to with Meena as well. I was like, yeah, log bolte hain, ex Kareem, ex this, ex Falana, jo bhi in Pakistan, but in my eyes, there is an ex eye to eye. Pata nahi kya hai, but there is something about the team, even though it wasn't a startup per se, but the team, like the founding team, like you mentioned, and the spirit that you guys had, it was always like a very, very small team. It always has been. But jitni lean organization thi, utna bade, like impact you guys created. And until now, until today. So I think it do with, Kulsum being the mentor and, the
Absolutely
whole together, but insane, yeah, amazing.
Yeah, no, Kulsum's been really good at like, sort of finding the right talent and taking a bet on us. And I think then she's one of those people, like Kulsum is family to me to this day. Like, I mean, it's like way beyond, like she knew me when I was 21, 22, and like she's seen me through my life at this point in time, right? When I started my career. But what is really great about her, I think she's always been really good at finding really good talent, and being very good about letting us sort of come into our own, sort of growing our careers, leading things, and doing things our own way. So that I think has really helped. So it's been one of those places that's been a very fun kind of place to work at. And then you're right, like I've had some amazing colleagues, and like the alumni now from that, they've gone on to do some incredible things, but they're also people that I consider lifelong friends, right? Like Essen and me, for example, like Essen is one of my like closest friends to this day. Like he's my confidant. He'll be confidant. He'll be the first person I'll talk things through. And like I always say like तुम्हारे साथ कभी भी काम करने का दोबारा हुआ, I'll do whatever you want me to do, but you I'll believe in. And I think like generally, I think world over, I think incubators and accelerators are kind of those spaces where a lot of people come, and you're not necessarily a startup, but you're working so closely with other startups. So agar aapke andar startup ka ya entrepreneurial keeda hai, that's often a good place to, sort of germinate and, sort of
Wow.
accelerate that, and you'll go on to do a lot of cool things yourself, like either run a startup of your own, or I think for all of us, a lot of us have been doing projects in a way that we're like, even if we're in companies, we've been running startups within companies,
Yes,
right?
correct. Yeah. And I think that this is what really matters a lot, because I think it also shows you that it's very important to have like a secure leader. Ek banda, if you have a secure team lead, ki yaar, these guys that I have in my team, they have the talent, they will do, the job that they're expected to do, but they will go an extra mile when needed. And it's okay to let them explore on their own. I think ek jo cheez hamari missing hoti in traditional workplaces is that sometimes our team leads and our bosses ki bas yahi 9 to 5 hai and yahi 9 to 5 hai and puri zindagi bas isi ke round encompass karni chahiye, and iske alawa if you want to work or something, then it turns into a sort of an issue. Ki matlab one brand and stick to this and stick to that. But I think I can relate to that.
No.
Yeah.
That was one of the things, right? Like, and I think that's what's truly visionary about when Kulsoom was up to khair was eye to eye ko sort of, she's not really involved beyond the board level. She's more on the investor, but even when eye to eye started, like I think with the team, and to this date, I believe, like with the team as well, she's been very always invested in us doing other things as well, and passion projects, and really exploring, like, sort of different talents and wearing many hats, because she was very clear always that the more fulfilled or the more skilled we are at multiple things or fulfilled in life, the more value we add anyways to our work. The happier you are, the more you work, but also the more skill sets, the more experiences you have, you're bringing a lot of that innovation back into work, right? And Aksar, you're right, like it's unfortunate because and this is, like, I think in Pakistan khas taur pe, like aksar mujhe lagta hai ki it's a great place to start your career off in, and sort of get your first 6, 7, 8 years of experience, but then at the mid level you just hit a ceiling. And that's often because you don't have mentors, or maybe you have insecure bosses, and then it's just like you put jaga nahi hai, and people might not be promoting you, or giving you those kinds of challenges, or sort of things to really accelerate. So there's a weird kind of, like, talent gap in the mid, like it's being worked on, but it's a blank. And then we have executives, right? And a lot of times those executives will come from, like, up to hair, like the whole tag of, like, Pakistani, right? Like it's almost like you have to exit to get that kind of experience and be able to come back as an executive. It's very strange. In my experience, I've always felt like there's been this gap of sort of middle management, or like mid career, mid to senior ka jo gap hai to travel. It's been very hard, especially in the traditional sort of.
It makes a lot of sense, because exactly like you mentioned, like skill gap, skill training agar nahi ho, and if you're only stuck at a manager level, and uske baad you're like, okay, executive agar banna hai, to how do I jump those, like,
how do I jump?
Exactly. So it's crazy. But in terms of experience, Anusheh, I really want to know, okay, you've had a chance to be affiliated with amazing organizations, like outside of work as well, right? If we talk about UNDP, if we talk about Acumen Fellow, if we talk about Google Business Group, and ये सारी वो initiatives हैं जो कि एक तरह से you learn a lot, yeah? You're part of these initiatives, which again, youth-led women empowerment pe focus bahut zyada tha. That social change, wherever you are, of course, focusing more on Pakistan. So how was that experience for you? And एक मासूमाना सवाल जो कि लोगों का आएगा कि यार ये opportunities मिलती कैसे हैं कि यार how do I get in? It seems too far-fetched, it seems too this, it seems too that. But looking at your experience, you have been, like treading a path one step after the other. It wasn't like, of course, you mentioned कि mentors का होना, and then like having that sort of a circle around you, it always helps, in terms of learning and having that experience and having that little bit of like initiative lene ka kiya, it always helps. But how was that for you?
No, I think a lot of things was so मेरा एक ethos है, और वो ये है कि जो चीज अगर मुझे करनी है ना, तो मैं उसके पीछे बड़ी जोर से पड़ती हूँ. I don't have any qualms about not coming off strong. Like I do things not by house, I'm all in. So I think that not having that hang up has really helped. So for a lot of these things, it's just been like, listen, I'll cold email, I'll cold call, I'll talk to people
Yeah,
who've been affiliated with, and I'll just like, sort of, in a very professional way, slide into their
of course.
DMs
Yes.
and be like, I want it in a very professional, respectful way. It's just like, here's why I'm interested, and I really want to, sort of
Yeah.
work with that. And I think people respond to that a lot of times.
Yes.
I think a lot of times we discount the fact, like, and so this is like something tangentially related, but like, last month was kind of this time jab Fulbright की applications खुली हुई होती हैं, and as a sort of alumni, every year I kind of sort of open up this offer, like I'll work with students to sort of put their applications together, and I'll do the review and all of that.
Yeah.
But it's so clever because like it's so cleverly, it's so strange, that a lot of times people will ask you a lot of questions and be really invested, but they somehow forget or skip the most important part, which is actually submitting the application, right? Which is actually pursuing that thing. And so I think this is kind of related to that as well. For some reason, we'll be really interested, we'll follow things, but जब वो opportunity कोई खुली भी हो, the application नहीं करेंगे, या we won't go and approach and sort of say like, okay, this is what I want, and this is how can I make it work. And so for a lot of these things, it's just been, hey, I'm really interested, this is why I'm interested, this is what I think I can bring, and I would love to learn here. And so a lot of doors have opened up because of that. I also think, again, like like people I've met, and so mentors and sponsors are great, but one thing that I also want to sort of, and this starts paying off, I think, this starts coming into play, you realize this much later in life, but एक तो mentorship or like sort of networking और वो होती है जो आप एक level ऊपर से कर रहे हो, right? Like people that inspire you, whose career trajectories inspire you, you want to sort of either join them or follow that, or like emulate that kind of trajectory. But what's really, really important is also like horizontal networking, right? Your peers. And a lot of times you're all figuring out things at the same time, but a lot of times my peers have really shown up with you, see a lot of your hard work or your hustle or the things that your skill sets very closely, and they can be actually really great champions for you as well. So I think that kind of really made a lot of sense. But and I think कि वो ही बात है, like it's just always talking to people, like knowing where these opportunities are. It's about talking to people, figuring out okay, like here's where I'm struggling with, being very honest with what I wanted to do, what my aspirations were. A lot of times it's been friends or like peers that have said like, I think you can do this, or I think you should do this, and उससे पहले मेरे शायद दिमाग में वो ख्याल भी ना आया हो. So a lot of times it's been that, and then it's just been like, okay, if something makes sense and if I want something, then I'm all in, I'll go chase it.
I love the fearlessness. Living for it. And you say Fulbright, because since you mentioned already, that is also one Masumana Sawal, we get a lot. So since you are someone who deals with that on an annual basis, that you have for people who are aiming for Fulbright, yeah, aiming for, such scholarships in the future. So yeah.
Absolutely. So I love helping people out with this because if I didn't have the Fulbright, I would never have been able to sort of go for a master's abroad and all of that. So as much as I can accelerate that for other people, would love to do that. But like in terms of tips, I think number one, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about like oh, my GPA is not 3.7 or 3.8, so I can't apply, or it's like I'm not really by sort of the standards of living, like I've gone to the top school in Pakistan maybe, and so maybe I'm not financially needy enough to get a scholarship and all of that. So I think the number one tip, the number one thing that I would want to clarify and sort of is that it's not a merit-based scholarship, nor is it just a need-based scholarship. So it's one of those scholarships that looks actually at your entire entire, sort of trajectory, like work, academic, who you are as a person. It looks at your profile holistically, and
Mhm.
that's how it, sort of, that's how they evaluate applications, right?
Right.
So being on the panel as well, having, sort of having interviewed for, sort of candidates as well, and then helping people as well. Like one of the things that I would say is it's really important to know that there'll be two different kinds of candidates. Somebody might be academically really, really strong, and that for the course that they want to study or the things that they want to study makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And so their academic background may, sort of hold a lot more weightage than their work experience. But for somebody else, maybe their academics experience is like, it's not a really high GPA. I had a very, like, sort of average CGPA,
Mhm.
but their work experience kind of, really is relevant to where they want to go, and the masters really makes sense for them to be able to, unlock the next steps in their career.
Mhm.
um, and then the obviously the personal statement is really, really important. And I think, like, number one tip that I always tell people is, don't write like, I want to study masters in public administration or whatever.
Mhm.
Like that should not be your opener. There's just, like, so many. I think हमारे ज़माने में there would be like about 1,000 words, and I've heard that it's gone down to about like 750 to 800 words now. So you
Oh.
have to make every word count. And so try to start off with a very strong anecdote in terms of why really this particular field or subject.
Mhm.
What about it is very personal to you, and because your personal story for how you relate to whatever you want to do in life is very individual to you. Nobody can replicate. मेरी motivations, my motivations से 100% same नहीं होंगी, and that's what really makes you stand out as a candidate. And I think uske apart, like, there's just like, go through their website. There's a lot of FAQs that are very, very, sort of detailed. But in terms of just be prepared with that and start your application process as early as possible.
Mhm.
Also find recommenders that truly will not just take a template and sign it, but
Mhm.
can truly vouch for who you
Yeah.
are as a person. I think that makes a lot of sense. So these are just like the top level tips. I
Nice.
won't go into everything else because
No, no,
that
no.
would be a whole different kind
Yeah,
of.
for that, we'll probably need a separate session on its own. But
Yes.
yeah, I think coming back to your work experience, Anusheh, if we can talk more about, because I think in the last 5 years or maybe more, mashallah, you've been really involved in the fintech space. So you worked with U Microfinance Bank, and then now you are working with Oraan as the head of credit, new products, and verification. So tell me more about Oraan, because again, like I said in the beginning, I think Oraan really caught my eye. Because of the mission, it's designed for the women, by the women. And I think the way it started off, like how people had these traditional committees, like little, like get-togethers every month, all of these, like our aunties and our moms and everybody used to get together. कि इस महीने इस आंटी की बारी है, next महीने किसी और की बारी है. So bringing that concept online, I think it was like
Yeah.
completely localized sort of a platform. So in my eyes, I think that was like, wow, कि मतलब किस तरह it's happening. And then Dusra, I think the trajectory that Oraan has followed so far, right? Again, started off with focusing on women. Again, the main focus still lies there, but now focusing more towards the youth-led initiatives as well that you are now working on. So tell me more about Oraan, your journey with Oraan. Why did Oraan even like start off? I mean, of course, we all know the reason, but let's voice it out as much as possible because we need that.
Absolutely. So, like, so I'll pick up like my journey with Iran. Like, so when they started off around 2018 and were doing a lot of their research and bringing up, I was a fan.
Mhm.
And so sort of working still in the banking space. So I was in U Microfinance Bank, but like one of my portfolios that I was heading was like, sort of digitization, and a lot of that work was again like corporate and the startup partner, and
Right.
it was like finding out like what were the cool new fintech startups, and really, sort of bringing and brokering partnerships with them to be able to, sort of financially include a lot more people,
Mhm.
right? Like that banks, by the way they're structured, or their product offerings, they those people don't have access to them. And microfinance ki both specific target audience hai,
Right.
as well, right? Like, so, sort of diversifying this. And Oraan was one of the, sort of startups I was really watching, and I was
Mhm.
pursuing them for a long time for a partnership. And what really impressed me throughout was Halima, the founders, sort of, she was very, very fiercely protective of the customer, right? And that's what makes fintech so special, right? Like, they will go out of their way to address customer needs that, the traditional banking industry is not being able to.
Mhm.
And she was very fiercely loyal to the fact that this partnership will not make sense unless certain, sort of compliance or regulatory issues was sorted, where it was truly creating a, sort of value add or convenience, or making sense for her customers, which was like a lot of, it's women first, right? So um account opening kit, right? Like, they can't travel, they don't want to travel to a Kirana store to do their biometric for a mobile wallet account ki certain limits upar niche karne ke liye. So how do we work around those? A lot of those kinds of issues, right? Like, they may not have the documents required to be able to open a bank account in their own name. So how do we sort of cater to that? And so that always impressed me. We tried to work around those for, a while, but eventually, I think at this one time, like, Halima sort of called me, and I thought she's just repicking up one of the threads, and she's like,
Yeah.
"Listen, I'm not here to talk about the partnership, but do you want to come work with us?"
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I was like, I was such a fan that it instantaneously made sense. So I was like, I definitely want to discuss this more. And uske baad, like, I think initially, because I was based in Islamabad at that point in time, and initially she was like, okay, we'll do a new products and innovation and strategy kind of role, and you can work remotely from Islamabad. And I was just by chance in Karachi and came in and met her. And like, by the end of that meeting, I was like, listen, I'm in. And also, if we want to do this right, I don't think it can be done remotely from Islamabad. So I'm moving. And I think initially she thought, like, has she, like, is this person for real? Like, has she lost it? Like, who does this? I think Shushu may, like, I'm pretty sure, like, Halima was a bit like taken aback also, and like wondering, like, hey, matlab, this can't be for real. Like, she's just like, abhi just joshe kitabat mein um but that's how much it made sense to me, right? And like, so coming to the main thing, like, why it made sense to me is like, yeah, like, over 50% of our population is women,
Mhm.
yet only 7% is financially included, right? 19% of all loans go to women only in Pakistan. And like, we're big on lending. Like, there's a lot of lending,
Yeah.
borrowing happening over there. But only 19% of those loans go to women. And agar aap SME sector mein bhi dekh lo, to SME sector mein it's only 3% of SME kind of loans go to women. And for a fact, being, sort of like, with, having worked with and talked to a lot of these players, is because there's a lot of SME businesses that are women led, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
acceleration happening, and they can, but a lot of those programs are supporting them, but yet formal finance ke andar se they're still excluded. So these are some of the really abysmal kind of, figures that and nobody is, like you said, truly solving for them. हमारे बहुत अरसे तक, I think, like, the idea of inclusion was, unfortunately, that will pink label things, right? And it'll be like a pink bus se leke a pink, like,
Yes.
sort of advert, or a pink, like, ATM card. And the new pink labeling is like having a account that is called Shugufta account, or like, female sounding name account. And that's it, like that, and they'll be like, okay, a little bit of lower deposit or no deposit
Mhm.
requirements, but it's not truly solving for the use cases,
True.
right? Even within the fintech space, like, a lot of the fintechs in Pakistan are also solving for, and not to say that's not a big enough problem, but they're solving for, sort of payment solutions,
Mhm.
right? अब 7% औरतों के बैंक अकाउंट्स हैं, वो पेमेंट सॉल्यूशंस की तो एम्बिट में से ऑलरेडी, like, they're out of it, right? There are some new players, that are trying to solve for this, um, especially, like, some of the newer wallets, but even then they're missing on the use cases that are important to women. And at the same time, we know for a fact, like so in 2018, when Oraan was starting off, like the founding team at that point in time, when they did kind of research, Rosca's, like you said, it's very localized because it's very indigenous. So it's across developing countries, but it shows up in very indigenous ways. Like, so it's not, hame BCs or committees where like it's like indigenous to Pakistan as well, but there's like variations in Turkey, Egypt, China, across the world, right? But it shows up in very unique flavors in a lot of these places. So Roscas is very, very indigenous, or like BCs or committees as we call it, is very indigenous to sort of Pakistan. And about 41% of 41% of Pakistanis at that time were actually engaging in committees to be able to meet their financial needs, savings and borrowing. Or now this figure goes up to like sort of 60%. 60% of Pakistanis are relying on this informal sort of market, and the market opportunity is like about $52 billion annually.
Oh my God.
And this is just for Pakistan, right? Like I'm talking about, like it's just mind blowing. And it's all done very informally and traditionally, and like you were mentioning, right? Like the committees that we kind of grew up in. But the thing with that also was like you have to really trust the people that you're with. There's a lot of hassle of managing it and all of that. In recent times, I'm sure you're aware, like, but there was like this 52 million का जो है वो fraud भी हुआ था, like this woman who started it off running these committees, and then I think at a certain point in time it's just she was trying to manage one with another with the third cycle, and it blew up, and so it became like a huge fraudulent case, right? Like, and the problem with that is in traditional committees, there's no, unless you're doing it with your family, there's no financial transaction ka record, right? Because it's always done in cash. You're not really getting an invoice. You're not really getting some kind of trail, and you're putting a lot of that sort of trust in that. So we were solving for that kind of problem, right? Like with having it on an app. They like Oraan is essentially, we all often joke like Oraan in itself is the committee auntie. We're the auntie that manages all the part, right? So it's like it's without the sort of intervention of a middle party, and a lot of it is done digitally. So there's invoicing, there's a trail that kind of is attached to it as well, and then it's just about like wo jo pura hota hai, like in traditional you have to either sort of pull out through a lottery system what month you'll get in, or have to really negotiate it. With Oraan, that's not the case. You get the money in the month that you want it for whatever, right? Like aapki December is one of those like sort of hotspot months because a lot of weddings are happening. So a lot of people are doing committees for it. But the really interesting thing with then committees is like it's not just a one-time thing. Like people are financing everything from their sort of deliveries of their children, and especially like talking about women, right? Like, so deliveries of children, all the way to like when they're in school, all the way to acha shadiyan ab karni hai, all the way to like, okay, your first car, ki down payment or other things, right? Like it's that once it's not a need that kind of goes away, and a lot of these people will either not get traditional loans because the requirements are so rigid that they're excluded, especially for women, right? Like अगर आप हाउसवाइफ हैं तो आपके पास नहीं है सैलरी डॉक्यूमेंट, आपके पास नहीं है like bank, sometimes not even bank accounts, right? Like so you have to prove that or give that kind of proof to be able to sort of get any kinds of loans. So the loans are again in name of your husband, father, some male guardian, and you kind of lose control of that money, right? Like it's often used as that kind of tool of control as well. So you don't get access to this, and at the same time, if you do qualify, then obviously you have to pay really high markup rates, and aajkal to policy rate bhi itna high, like borrowing is expensive, all right? And this is exactly the economy that you need access to finance in as well. So a lot of these sort of things is like committees becomes a very much, sort of not only more convenient or and cheaper alternative, but also like one of the places that you will be able to
Yeah.
get financing through when everything else kind of does not include you, is not solving for you. And that's why I think women were really, really important. We know for a fact in our research that 80% of household budgets in Pakistan are managed by women,
Yes.
yet they might not be earning as much. Like the formal participation, at least I think workforce urban centers like tier 1, tier 2, and maybe like some tier 3 cities, it's like about, I think they say women's urban employment participation was around 10% or something like that. So it's very low.
Yeah.
So you don't have necessarily your own money, but you are the budget minister for your
Mm-hmm.
house.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And you're often squirreling, they're often squirreling away money and doing that. So it was about solving for the access of finance,
Mm-hmm.
for this segment that's completely been ignored and left out, and yet is such a significant part of our population. And also, we know that when women have access, like research has shown this over and over, when women have access to finance, they not only make better decisions for their households, but also the community around them, right? Yet even to this day, I think like Halima ki very powerful story of like why she got involved into this. She wanted to, like, she'd come back from Canada, and she wanted to open a bank account, and obviously did not have all of the requirements. Job nahi thi abhi, ye nahi tha. And like the person just essentially said like, आपने account क्यों खोलना, आप छोड़ दें, आप मत खोलें. She was getting married, and she was like, आपको नहीं जरूरत. I to this day, like, when I go sometimes to sort of file my income
Yeah.
return taxes, like, my they will recommend like, आपने क्यों ये file करना है, आपके तो इतने assets भी नहीं है, like don't file for income taxes, right? So women are treated with this like, आप क्या करिए, आप तो hobbies ही कर रही हैं, आपको ना file करने की taxes जरूरत है, ना आपको bank account की जरूरत है. um I know for a fact, like to this day, I cannot be a guarantor on my father's loan application because I'm a woman. And there's no, like, laws have changed around this, but a lot of times it's the, sort of staff that's dealing with you as well. Them not being women makes that kind of difference as well. They've interpreted you as being untrustworthy, even though within microfinance, in our case as well, women are better repayers of loans or any such kind of things. But for some reason, they're just not trustworthy enough. So there'll always be like, मतलब आपका कोई बेटा नहीं है. I'm like, मैं उनके बेटे से ज़्यादा कमाती हूँ. Like, why can't I sign on this?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so these are some of the realities that we're kind of living in, and that's why the mission made so much sense to me. And like, it's really, really important to acknowledge that, like, Halima, me, we're privileged, right? We still have access to a lot of these tools, and yet still we're being denied. So can you just imagine like what's
Mhm.
happening bottom of the barrel, or to a housewife, right? Like, of course, matlab unki 7% financially included sirf isliye because they'll go
Yeah.
and they'll be denied a bank account, or like it'll all be about like, आपके पास ये document नहीं है, या आपको जरूरत नहीं है, आपको ये क्यों चाहिए क्या. And then it's like it's a lot of times, right, like for perhaps banks also, right, like they assume that this is not going to be a high value or like high transaction volume account. So why do, like it's just a like it's just an account I'm opening, so there's not that kind of incentive maybe. But a lot of it is just our sort of how we've been socialized.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really, really interesting with, and we get this question a lot, right, like when we say Oraan is women first, that doesn't mean that we're women only.
Yeah.
It just means that we are solving primarily keeping in mind the barriers that women face when it comes to sort of financial access and access to capital. And what's really interesting is, and I mean, it's a no-brainer, but like people get really surprised when you design with keeping the barriers of women in mind. You're actually coming in the end to a product that's much simpler for everybody to use.
Yeah.
So we have a very healthy population of men who are like almost like men who are also coming in and doing committees with Oraan, because the process is just so simple, and because those barriers have gone away, it's just a better financing product for everybody.
Yeah. I think for me, Pata, what matters a lot here is that you guys aren't just building a platform, Pata, you are really tackling a mindset shift in the country, which is very deep rooted. It is cultural. We've been brought up this way. जब committee का नाम हमें आता है, it's really like affiliated only to women in a sense, right? कि सिर्फ औरतें ही committee, like committee auntie. Never heard of a committee uncle, for some reason.
Which is insane, because what, like actually right now a lot of these like retail or like sort of kirana stores, like businesses, inki sabse high net worth sort of committeeyan chalti hain, बोलियां लगती हैं कि like किस slot पे क्या होती है, and these are all run by men as well, so like men do it just as much, but like it's associated, it's traditional, and it's associated with like I'm sitting at home, need to do something, so I'm running a committee just to keep myself occupied, which is not true. But again, like I think that's also like looking at it, it was also about making sure this thing exists, people understand this form of financing. It's been going around for a long time, but it's not just for a specific either like socioeconomic segment or like sort of gender-based segment or any of those things, but it's actually a tool that households use to change the trajectory of their life. But again, like keeping in mind, like particularly solving for women that may not get access to any of this if they were going to traditional places, right? Because inke use cases ke liye nahi ban raha.
But I think मेरी नजर में पता है Nisha, this is one thing that I really want to hear more about, is in terms of when Oraan was starting off, right? How did you guys build the trust in the segment of your audience? Because pehli cheez, when you're talking about the Kiryana store, right? If a woman goes there, she might not go there alone. हमेशा कोई ना कोई साथ ही होता है, या तो कोई भाई, या तो your father or your husband. And then whatever committees that people were doing traditionally, you knew those people, and they were sort of like एक background check आपका ही, आपके husband या आपके again the family का पूरा होता है. And you can only do things that are trusted by the men in your family, right? So how did that sort of mindset shift come about with an online platform, and then building that trust not just with the women of the family, but also bringing the men on board? It is a verified platform where it's safe to invest money, like invest in a committee like that, and it's open for everybody, men and women both, but of course women first.
So one of the things that has been really important, that was, again, like I was saying, it was that it's an indigenous product, and people understand it. So when you're trying to go and talk about it, like people are very clear about aap kya baat kar rahe ho. A lot of times financial sector mein khas taur pe things get lost in jargon and complicated, and a lot of times, and especially women, like because we've not been equipped with that language, we'll just be like, okay, I don't understand this is why I'm not sort of participating. And that's also why, like you mentioned, men come into play as well, like among other things. It's just they go out and speak to 10 other people जिन्होंने शायद सुना हुआ होगा किसी चीज के बारे में. They have more exposure in that sense. So that's why, like the deferment will be like, मैं already semi भी होंगी कि यार अच्छा कुछ गलत ना हो जाए, and that's how that. So I think having a product that was very sort of indigenous and like within the DNA of people, that really helped. And I think that's what is key in any sort of fintech space specifically, and in developing countries specifically, to build that, take that as a brand you got. And then I think it was a lot of like the team that was sort of like the founding team. They did a lot of work of doing community building, going to people, talking to them. So a lot of that has to happen. It can't just be, again, like you said, it's a mindset shift. We're also, in terms of a mindset shift, in terms of Pakistan is still one of those places where cash on delivery, for example, is king, right? So up to like maybe like 85% to 95% of all transactions online will be like, we want to see a thing before we pay for it. We don't like prepaying for things. It's changing, it's becoming better, but it's still one of those places where like So paying online to somebody, and you're not knowing anything about them, that becomes a bit of a challenge. But it's a lot about, for the first year, it was a lot about going to people, building that community, talking to them, sort of doing the end to end ourselves, really building that kind of trust, and like um, in us as in the people as a team, and then the organization, and then also being SECP registered, right? Like making sure that we had all of the documentation and we were able to, sort of do that, and then truly solving a use case. And I think from there, what becomes really important is your first, sort of supporters or first customers or first buyers, then it starts kind
Yeah.
of
Ripple effect.
multiplying, right? Like they become ambassadors for you. Like if so really it was a lot about sort of going out, doing the community building, addressing those concerns, and then giving experience that not only was very sort of seamless and really sort of convenient, and but also addressed their needs, their exact pain points in a way. And then the rest is just like, they'll be your ambassadors and they'll do the championing for you. So I think that's how the team kind of started. And I know, like, initially jo hum stories bhi sunte hain of the team, it was just very hands-on approach. Community building has been a huge part of it, and to this day, right? Like we have a community on Facebook, with their groups on WhatsApps, where women come and sort of talk about money management, other things that around that, ask each other questions, ask us questions, and having that kind of safe space. I think that really made a lot of difference.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I feel like word of mouth is the strongest in Pakistan. I don't know about other markets, but just tarah word of mouth, like it happens in Pakistan, shayad hi maine kahin aur dekha ho, seriously.
I think so. I think because it's also I think it's because there's so little information available elsewhere that you can truly trust as well, right? Like data, और मतलब बहुत credit bureau से लेके या बहुत सी चीजों में, like information is hard to come by, right? It's not publicly available, it's not credible. Everybody says anything. And also, like, we know that the internet can be used a lot for misinformation as well. So I think what makes us feel very safe is that kind of sort of word of mouth, like किसी ने tried and tested किया, वो हमें authentic बता रहे हैं. And especially people that we trust, right? Like so those kinds of people that we look up to matter a lot, because I think hum kafi us tarah se, like we trust in personalities and authentic figures. And I think it's a very human nature kind of thing to look at somebody who's done something and learn from their experience and replicate it. But also, like, by nature of this product, it's a very community driven product, right? Like people come together and do it. Like 10 households are involved in maybe one raska, and uske ird-gird sari planning ho rahi hoti hai. So there is a communal aspect to committees that that is important to the customer, and that was important for us to also kind of replicate.
No, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. एक और initiative जिस पर मैंने लाजमी आज बात करनी है, Anusheh, is the new initiative, which is Study Now, Pay Later. It's very interesting, and I wish ये पहले होता जब हम लोग पढ़ रहे थे, honestly. Oh God, but yeah, let's get into it. For all the students watching in Pakistan, I think this is going to be, one part that you should not miss out, please. So go ahead, Anusheh, all yours.
Absolutely. So I think that, like, SNPL is very, very close to my heart. And again, like, like I say, like I often end up working in things that were either a pain point for me or people around me, and I thought, like, I somehow have always ended up solving for that problem. And so this was a problem that I faced, right? Like semester fees देना जो है in उस जमाने में मुश्किल होता था, अब तो like आसमानों को छू रही, like the fees and structure, especially like sometimes like even school, like primary school and secondary school fees are twice what we used to pay for universities, and quite comparable to what you're getting at a university degree.
But
And so
even
it blows my
admission
mind
fees,
sometimes.
yeah? Even
Admission,
admission fees. I'm just like, kya ho raha hai there? Like,
what
kis
is
fees
going
ka
on?
admission? Like, what's happening? Crazy,
So
crazy.
affordability is really becoming like much
True.
more efficient. But it was even back then, right? Like I remember, like at the time that I was in undergrad, मेरी undergrad की fees होती थी, मेरा भाई O levels में था. A levels is always
Mhm.
expensive. So
Yeah.
I used to, nobody said anything because we don't want especially our daughters to know कि like अच्छा finances की कुछ मसले हैं.
Yeah.
But I could feel stressed, right?
Mm.
So study now, pay later was just like one of those things that I wish exactly like kitab hota, I would be the first customer,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like, so I really literally like kind of buttered something that that was in their pain point.
Yeah.
But but how it kind of sort of started, and like part of my journey with Donan was also like really looking after like product innovation and how could we sort of diversify or use the original committees, our flagship product, and be able to serve a lot more of our customers needs. And so what we realized at that point in time, like about like year and a half, 2 years ago, was key education was one of the biggest, was among the bigger use cases
Yeah.
that people were using to save, to saving in committees for. So वो semester fees, exam fees, इन चीजों के लिए करते हैं. And this was about like sort of 30% of our audience was using committees. But the thing with that is also very few, sort of very few, I think, households are financially savvy enough that they're pre-planning their finances enough that they know कि अब 1 साल में admission आना है या
Yeah.
6 महीने में admission आना है, so we should start doing that. But also then the economy started changing so much that now you don't even have that kind of sort of access cash available to be
Yeah.
able to plan that much ahead or save that much ahead. So so that's where we really started. Okay, this is a gap, and committees are serving some part and will always do, but there's something that can be improved within this.
Mhm.
And we were very clear always that we want to be a very responsible financial institution. So we never want to sort of over in debt our households and put
Yeah.
them into this kind of cycle कि आप निकल ही नहीं पा रहे हो debt में से,
Mhm.
but like being able to sort of get access to finance, to be able to get certain um things, hit certain milestones that are actually investments into your future.
Yeah.
And education is exactly one of those things. It changes the trajectory of your future, your household's future. So it was very close to our hearts to be able to sort of solve for that. And we've kind of iterated on that, tested with, we piloted over the last year with 2 universities, IBA and Jauddin University.
Mhm.
And essentially the way that the product works is, you we get into partnerships with universities, and then students can apply to Oraan directly. We do certain due diligence
Mhm.
with the students themselves, and then we pay the university directly the outstanding dues, and then students can pay us back throughout their semester in either 3 months, 6 months, or sometimes if you need a little bit more,
Mhm.
sort of runway time, in 10 installments essentially. So it's to sort of it's been designed keeping in mind households that
Mhm.
have multiple children,
Yeah.
sort of in
Yeah.
right now in schools or universities, or sometimes students that are doing freelance jobs, and sort of doing tutoring on the side, and they may not be able to afford that entire chunk, but they want to be more financially independent and be more financially savvy and be able to sort of pay it in installments. So it's been designed with those people in mind. And I think like at Iran, what's really important to us is like we truly believe that no major chunk of your money should be invested in or like tied up in one major expense at a time.
Mhm. Makes sense.
That's just not how financial wellness is achieved, or how you should be going through your finances, right? Like you should be able to do every month आपके household cash flow इस तरह manage होना चाहिए कि like you're being able to maintain lifestyle for a certain
Yeah. Yeah.
time as well, right? Like if it is if you want to be able to go and afford a Tim Hortons coffee, your budget should be able to work for you, right? Like in certain senses.
Yes.
And you should just be making, kind of smart decisions like that. Or and कुछ आपका रेनी डे या इमरजेंसी फंड में जाना चाहिए, कुछ इन्वेस्ट हो रहा होना चाहिए, and then some will just be like, household expenses that you can't do, and then education on top of that for your children. So instead of paying that whole, like, right now, like, a semester fee can range anywhere from like 1 lakh rupees Pakistani to all the way to 6 or 7 lakh rupees at some of the institutions, right? And so to take it all out in one go and just put it all in, it throws the entire household into havoc. So that's one of the places, and the other places is really like, we truly believe that आपकी एक तो gender based पे differences in financial education, and then just generally, right, like students के time कोई बताता नहीं है these real world kind of lessons, right? And so you if you're like me, you're going to end up in your first job and stumble through a lot of really bad financial decisions, and then realize, okay, this is not quite working out. And like for like 6 months, I was just like, where is my pay and salary going? What am I doing? Like, I don't even know where.
I was in the same boat. I was exactly in the same boat. Yeah,
you learn by doing, because nobody's taught you these things. Nobody has talked to you about these things. So it's very important to us that the account, or like, the sort of the person that we're sort of engaging with is the student themselves. So they make the decisions in partnership with their parents, but we're teaching a lot of like that money management to them, and giving that kind of financial independence as well. It might be that your parent or a guardian is the one that's paying in, but Oraan will communicate with you, so you learn to manage and communicate with that kind of sense. So it was really important around that as well. And it's been really interesting, right? Like with education also, we've learned there's a lot of hang-ups in terms of getting financing, because there's a concept of like khudari and pride, and like we'll only engage in this if we need it. And we'll be making some really bad decisions household level wise or otherwise with our money, just to not be sort of viewed as like, okay, this is kind of hard for me, where it's very different in developed countries, right? Like there's multitudes of options available for student financing, and it's like usually the first go-to that you kind of check out.
And I think one thing that I really want to address here, Anusheh, is that when I did talk about this with a couple of students in my circle, and I think there's one thing that we started talking about as well in the intro call. Here, there's this question around the SMPL being Sharia compliant or not. And I think this is one question that will probably come up even after this episode. So I really want you to address it, because I think it's really important.
Yes, absolutely. And I think like this is a really kind of opportune moment for me to just go into some of the salient product features as well. But yes, SMPL is 100% Sharia compliant, and we've worked really hard. I can understand why there's skepticism, because there isn't a product that is really sort of similar to this that is also Sharia compliant, right? Because students have never been a use case for the sort of financing sector anyways, because they're not the ones in paying back, or there are other options available. But so the way that it works is like the concept of rental agreement. It works like a sub-rental agreement. So the university, Oraan, and the student, they're into sort of three-way tri-party contract. And the university is the service provider, and RAN is the payments fee support service partner. And so it's almost like in a very crude way, us buying the services or buying the course load and being able to sort of sell it back. That's the concept that it's kind of built on, and how it's Sharia compliant. We do have a Sharia certificate that's available on all of our website and all of that. And I think like we highly encourage people, if they still have skepticism, to sort of get in touch with our Sharia advisory board as well and have conversations with them. But what we realized was this is really, really important to the student body as well, right? Like the product being Sharia compliant, and especially with certain things, right? Like that, I think that are sort of investments in our future, like your first home or your education. I think it's even more important for people that it is Sharia compliant. And so, like, apart from that, like some of the other things or the ways that it works is the product in itself is like, it takes us just 7 working days from the application coming in to actually making the decision and dispersing the amount to your university. So it's not very lengthy, or like doesn't take months. There's no like, sort of heavy interview requirements. There's no merit or need-based requirements. So we're merit and need blind. As long as there's affordability and ability to pay, you can enroll in SNPL.
Makes sense. Wow. Okay. So this brings me to, thank you so much for sharing all of this, Anusheh. Like seriously, I'm so glad, because honestly, I think your journey, again, like I said in the beginning, it speaks volumes of the efforts that you've done, the initiatives that you've been involved in, the initiatives that you started yourself. Everything has been very much youth-led, female empowerment. Like it's just like, like the 2 themes of everywhere that you work at, and it's amazing, mashallah. So I think, which is also what brings me to an announcement for the people who are going to watch this.
Drum roll.
But yeah, so Oraan and Investing at 25 are going to be moving into a partnership, inshallah, which I'm truly, honestly, super excited about. One, because Oraan really stands for the values that I personally really align with. And I think, like you mentioned, money management, emergency funds, how to handle your finances on rainy days, how to handle your finances on good days as well, right? We don't have that knowledge at home. And I think that's what I had to go through as well. Exactly like you mentioned, हमने कर के सीखा है, like बहुत गंदे decisions लिए तब जाके हमें ख्याल आया कि shit यार, इतना पैसा लग किधर गया है हमारा, like where has all the money gone? Paycheck to paycheck. How do you create secondary incomes? How do you manage that money? How do you invest in Pakistan? How do you save money? So I think all of these questions will be addressed, inshallah, in the future collaboration that we'll be working on.
Yes.
So
we're really excited about it.
Yes.
Absolutely, 100%. I think you really, sort of nailed it down. Like the values that we're working with in terms of just really, I think with what's always been really inspiring for me in the work that you're doing, it's about investing time, energy, and money.
Yes.
And sort of really, sort of going into that, because what you'll find is a lot of end all या be all शायद बहुत सी चीजें आके जो है वो money पे ही end करती हैं. Either we're trying to make more of it, save more of it, worrying about it or not. So I think it's really important, but unfortunately we get handicapped by not having that kind of information. And I think with this partnership, like some of the service provision stuff that we're doing and some of the sort of just overall connecting all the players and getting like that kind of right educational content out there, I'm really, really excited because it's going to be really cool.
Awesome. No, thank you so much. I am so happy. Honestly, the first call that we had, I was like super excited, and it still remains. And I'm sure that again, inshallah, in the journey ahead, we're going to do amazing stuff together. But always rooting for you guys. I love Oraan. I love what you guys do. And hopefully, we can continue this on this new trajectory that we're both going to be on. So thank you for coming on the show. Thank you.